Up next in the broadcast, President Park Geun-hye says time is of the essence when it comes to the declining birth rate and the aging population in Korea, noting that the next 5 years could determine the next 50. A group of U.S.-based historians say they're not happy about Japan's attempt to whitewash history, particularly when it comes to altering textbooks in Japan and around the world. And a temporary truce is declared in eastern Ukraine to allow civilians to escape the deadly fighting between the Ukrainian government and Russian-backed separatists. Primetime News begins now.
Welcome to the program. You're watching Primetime News live from Seoul. I am Kang Chae-ri.
And I'm Sean Lim. Hope you had a great week. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. We begin with the nation's aging dilemma. Korean President Park Geun-hye says now is the time to address the issue of the country's rapidly aging population.
The government blames this crisis on the ever-growing trend of delaying marriage, and it aims to clear the pathways to encourage young couples to wed. Our Hwang Ji-hye has the details.
Korean President Park Geun-hye says the next 5 years is a crucial time for dealing with the country's population crisis. Speaking at a meeting to address the low birth rate and aging population on Friday, she said the future depends on what measures are taken now.
지금 우리가 제대로 대응을 해야만 위기를 기회로 바꿔서 지속 가능한 성장 동력을 창출할 수가 있습니다.
The government largely attributes these problems to a rise in delayed marriages. To tackle this, the government pledged to lay out plans to improve youth employment rates, lower costs associated with marriage, and cut housing expenses for young couples. It also aims to create a family culture that promotes gender equality as a means to raise the birth rate among dual-income households. And to cater to the needs of an increasingly large elderly population, the government said it will actively foster the so-called silver hair industry, which includes the medical and leisure sectors.
정책 하나하나부터 재정 투자 그리고 유무형의 인프라 구축 우선 순위까지 변화하는 인구 구조에 맞춰서 재구조화하는 그런 방안을 검토해야 하겠습니다.
With the new set of plans, the government is targeting a birth rate of 1.4 by 2020 as it tries to shake off its title as the OECD member with the lowest birth rate. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Now, the reason why President Park Geun-hye emphasizes the next 5 years is due to growing concerns that aging population will take a heavy toll on Korea's economic growth prospects. Our Kim Ji-yeon reports on the numbers backing these worries.
The Korean economy is expected to take the brunt of the blow from rapidly aging society and low birth rate problem. In fact, the National Assembly Budget Office says the country's potential growth rate will start sliding down the 0% range by 2060, largely due to an anticipated labor shortage in the next decade.
A labor shortage could lead to a reduction in the country's rate of consumption, investment, and savings, and in turn affect the country's potential growth rate.
By next year, Korea's workforce will peak at nearly 37 million, comprising 73% of the total population. But after that, the number is expected to decline as the baby boomer generation exits the labor market. This refers to people born right after the Korean War between 1955 and 1963. The group numbers more than 7 million people. And with this pace, the senior citizen population is expected to rise exponentially over the next few years to account for more than 14% of the population. In response, Hyundai Research Institute suggests the government design more policies geared towards helping people balance school and family life with work, in addition to increasing the number of temporary jobs available for those heading into retirement. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
The Korean government and the ruling Saenuri Party are resuming talks to reform the country's health insurance system. The two sides held a meeting at the National Assembly on Friday to improve proposals to block additional burdens on low-income earners while maintaining the fiscal soundness of the service's budget. However, the changes will have upper-income groups shouldering the difference. A ruling party lawmaker says talks are likely to wrap up by the first half of this year. The Welfare Ministry suspended the reform plan late last month, citing the sensitive nature of the policy. The chairman of Hyundai Motor Group and his son have sold around 13% of their stake in the group's logistics unit to give the two about $1 billion in cash. Analysts speculate the move was designed to raise cash for the son and heir apparent to allow him to solidify control over the firm by purchasing shares in key units. Our Kim Min-ji has more.
The chairman and vice chairman of Hyundai Motor Group have offloaded some of their stakes in the group's logistics affiliate, landing them some $1 billion in cash. Chairman Jung Mong-gu and his only son and deputy Eui-sun sold over 5 million shares in Hyundai Glovis, or 13.4% of equity in a block deal, according to industry officials on Friday. The price per share stood at around $210, 2.7% lower than the previous day's close. It's also down about $45 from what the family initially offered at their first attempt last month, which failed due to disagreement over sales terms. The sale comes as Hyundai Glovis has to meet a revised antitrust law on intra-group transactions. The law, which takes effect this month, calls for up to 3 years in jail for controlling shareholders owning a stake of 30% or more if they carry out intra-group transactions that benefit them. Now, with the stock sale sealed, the combined stakes held by the chairman and his son dropped to 29.99%. Analysts also see the move as an attempt to raise cash for the son and heir apparent, needed to increase his control in the automotive group by purchasing shares in key units. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
A group of U.S.-based historians say they're not happy about Japan's attempt to whitewash history. They say Tokyo tried to pressure a publisher to change how the issue of Japan's wartime sexual enslavement is described in one of its history textbooks. Our Connie Lee tells us more.
This is a joint statement scheduled to appear in the March edition of the official periodical of the American Historical Association. A copy of the statement, which was sent to Seoul-based Yonhap News Agency, shows 19 American history scholars expressing strong protest against Japan's attempts to suppress statements or water down atrocities in history textbooks, not only in Japan but also elsewhere in the world. The statement is in response to Japan's efforts in recent months to pressure U.S. publisher McGraw-Hill to change how it described its wartime sexual slavery issue in one of its history textbooks. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe claims there are errors in the history book taught in classrooms, with his administration continuing to deny state responsibility for the country's past atrocities. The group of scholars, led by Professor Alexis Dutton from the University of Connecticut, say that no government should have the right to censor history, and they accuse the Abe administration of questioning established history and attempting to eliminate references about the country's sexual enslavement of women during World War II. Historians estimate up to 200,000 women, mostly from Korea, were forced to work in brothels for the Japanese military. As a collective statement on a specific historical issue is seen as highly unusual, analysts are now watching how this will affect Abe's relations with the U.S. and his upcoming visit to Washington sometime this spring. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
American lawmakers are united in slapping more sanctions on North Korea. A bipartisan bill aiming to broaden current economic sanctions has been introduced and is likely to enjoy support from both Republicans and Democrats. Our Connie Kim reports.
U.S. lawmakers are pushing to broaden sanctions on North Korea in the wake of Pyongyang's alleged hack attack on Sony Pictures. U.S. House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Ed Royce said Thursday, A new piece of bipartisan legislation aims to prevent North Korea from accessing the hard currency that supports the regime. The bill would allow U.S. officials to freeze assets held in the U.S. of any individuals or international companies found to be doing business with the North or who have links to the regime's nuclear program. Those who contributed to the massive cyber attack on Sony Pictures last November would also be targeted. The legislation broadens current sanctions on the North, which are focused on U.S. companies and Americans. A similar bill was passed by the House last year and received in the Senate, but later scrapped. The bill's passage is more likely this time as the U.S. has vowed to clamp down on Pyongyang in light of the cyber attack on the Hollywood-based studio. The Senate is also expected to introduce a similar bill. Last month, U.S. President Barack Obama signed an executive order that imposes sanctions against 3 North Korean organizations and 10 individuals. It was the first time the U.S. had sanctioned any country for a cyber attack and implied more sanctions could be on the way. As the U.S. said at the time, it was just the first aspect of the U.S. response. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
North Korea has been and still is a tough country to invest in. It's extremely difficult to predict what will happen in this reclusive state. But the regime continues to seek much needed foreign investment. Our Hwang Sung-hee takes a closer look at how the world's most closed economy is trying to make money.
Its constant military provocations, threats, and dangerous brinkmanship over its nuclear program make North Korea the least attractive place for business. But some say the regime is opening up to draw much-needed foreign investment, for example, in tourism.
There is now a growing trade in tourism from the Netherlands to North Korea. So the North Korean government is now inviting Dutch students to go to Pyongyang to give Dutch language training to the North Korean tour guides.
Around 100,000 tourists visit this untrodden corner of the world every year, and North Korea says it aims to raise that number to 1 million. For that, it has set up opulent new ventures like the Masikryang ski resort. Korea Tours, a Western travel agency that organizes trips to the north, says the regime is enthusiastic about its program proposals most of the time.
A lot of projects that we've been working on that have become possible in the last 3 years or so are things we were working on beforehand.
But North Korea's unpredictability is troubling. The regime banned tourists last October on Ebola fears, with no signs of lifting it anytime soon. In fact, North Korea was placed at the very bottom of the Heritage Foundation's Index of Economic Freedom, with a score of 1.3 points out of 100. That's over 70 points behind South Korea and nearly 30 points below Cuba, which came second to last on the list.
So it doesn't provide any meaningful consistency in terms of policy. And also North Korea remains, many factors in North Korea are unknown. So I think that's the key risky factor for the investors.
Experts say North Korea's handling of the inter-Korean Kaesong industrial complex, with its frequent changes in regulations and unilateral shutdowns, is a good example of its uncertainty.
Despite the problem, trade between the two countries hit a record $2.3 billion last year, thanks to growing output in the joint business park. Given the lack of resources and capital, experts say Pyongyang must open up and reform its antiquated economic system.
That's the only way to improve the daily lives of North Koreans.
But first, North Korea will have to end its confrontation with the outside world over its nuclear program. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
Top diplomats from South Korea, Japan, and China are expected to meet next month for the first such trilateral meeting in 3 years. As of late, annual high-level diplomatic exchanges have been hampered by territorial issues and Japan's denials of its historical wrongdoings. A senior official at Seoul's foreign ministry says the 3 countries are discussing the possibility of holding minister-level talks in Seoul at the end of March. Pundits say the upcoming meeting could also serve as an opportunity for separate bilateral talks on other pending issues among the 3 ministers. The clock is ticking for the South Korean military to replace its aging fleet of fighter jets, which have already reached or even exceeded their lifespans. Our Kim Hyun-bin looks into Korea's plans for making a smooth transition when replacing those jets.
The Korea fighter jet program aims to develop 4.5 generation fighter jets to fill in the gap with more advanced technology, as a batch of Korean fighters are set to be retired in the coming years.
South Korea's Air Force has around 400 jets in service, but roughly half of them are antiquated jets, such as the F-4 and F-5. These days, 4th and 5th generation fighters are the mainstay globally, but Korea is lagging behind with mostly 3rd generation jets.
Korea has set aside roughly $17 billion for a project to develop and mass-produce 124.5 generation fighter jets that will replace the Air Force's old F-4s and F-5s. The KF-X jets are scheduled to be integrated into the Air Force in 2025. On top of that, Korea recently signed a roughly $7 billion deal with Lockheed Martin for 45th generation F-35 stealth fighters, though there are some concerns. Some experts worry that a delay could push Korea's already old fighter jet fleet to the limit. South Korea's defense ministry says it's looking into other options, such as enhancing the performance of the current KF-16 fleet and tanker aircraft to fill in temporarily. The KF-X, however, will not be Korea's first homegrown fighter jet. The F-A-50, which finished development in 2011, was integrated into the Air Force last October. That jet has already caught the eye of international buyers. Korea has exported more than 50 of them to Iraq, Indonesia, and the Philippines. Seoul also plans to sell 24 F-A-50s to Peru this year in a deal worth some $2 billion. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
The leaders of Germany and France are working together to ease tensions in eastern Ukraine between government forces and the Russian-backed rebels.
With more, we turn to Paul Yee at the News Center. Paul, there's been a major development on the front lines of this conflict. Give us the details.
Well, the pro-Russian separatist leaders announced a deal has been reached with Ukrainian authorities. A temporary truce was declared to create a humanitarian corridor that will help civilians trapped in the deadly crossfire. Both sides are reportedly upholding the ceasefire, but it's only set to last for a few more hours. This as a diplomatic blitz by Western leaders is preparing to head to Moscow with a long-term peace proposal. Our Son Jong-in has this report.
The leaders of Germany and France have proposed a new peace initiative for Ukraine, raising hopes of a breakthrough in the year-old conflict pitting Kiev against separatist rebels in eastern Ukraine. Angela Merkel and François Hollande said they have worked together to draft a proposal based on Ukraine's territorial integrity and hope it will be acceptable to both sides in the conflict. The high-level diplomatic maneuver is seen as an apparent bid to head off U.S. consideration of lethal military aid for the Ukrainian government in its war against the Russian-backed separatists. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, who had arrived in Kiev earlier, met with Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko and other top officials to affirm U.S. support for a diplomatic resolution to the conflict. Kerry also urged Moscow to show its commitment to a peaceful solution and to cease its military support for the separatists, an allegation that Russia strongly denies. Fierce fighting has flared again in the region in recent weeks, with rebels advancing on a railway hub held by Ukrainian troops after launching an offensive that scuppered a 5-month-old ceasefire. According to the United Nations, the fighting has claimed more than 5,000 lives since April last year, including some 220 civilians killed in just the past 3 weeks. Son Jong-in, Arirang News.
And shifting gears now to some industry news, the head of Sony Pictures is stepping down following one of the biggest scandals to hit the movie studio. Considered one of the most powerful executives in Hollywood, co-chairman Amy Pascal was thrust into the spotlight this past December after her private emails were leaked online by hackers. The correspondences with leading producers and other executives drew a firestorm of criticism. Among them were racially insensitive remarks she made about President Obama's taste in films. She also called actor Leonardo DiCaprio despicable after he dropped out of the studio's Steve Jobs biopic. Despite the controversy, industry experts believe that Sony will easily weather the storm.
I think Sony will definitely survive this scandal. I mean, if you look in the Hollywood community, there are only a few studios, so you have to do business with them if you want to work in this town. I do think it really damaged Amy Pascal and the release of those emails and the talent relationships that were frayed because of that. I think that did hurt her.
Sony did not immediately disclose who would be taking over the post, but employees there have said one possible successor could be Michael DeLuca, who serves as president of the production unit at Sony's Columbia Pictures. Pascal is set to officially give up her current position later in May. And finally, investors on Wall Street welcomed Twitter's latest earnings report despite a slowdown in new subscribers. The operator of the popular microblogging platform said Thursday that it earned $479 million in revenue in the fourth quarter. That's a 97% jump compared to the same period a year earlier. On the other hand, the number of monthly active users during the period totaled 288 million worldwide, representing a net gain of only 1.4% for 2014. That's the lowest growth rate on record for Twitter, and also the first time user growth has fallen behind Facebook, which has 5 times more users. And that wraps up our look at international stories for now. I'll see you back here next week.
Hello everyone, I'm Stephen Che with the Sports Brief. And starting with golf, the top pros took to the links across the globe with most of the major tours hosting events. Let's take a peek at the action. Starting at the Bahamas LPGA Classic, Korea's Park Geun-hye ended the day at a solid 5 under par for second, a shot behind leader Brooke Pancake. 6 compatriots, including Baek Yu-jung and Oh Ji-young, sit just 2 shots behind. At Torrey Pines, Tiger Woods withdrew after 11 holes due to tightness in his back. But looking at the standings, Nicholas Thompson leads at 8 under, while No Seung-yeol and Kim Min-hui sit at 2 under par, the highest for the Koreans. Meanwhile, on the Euro Tour, Lee Westwood and Alejandro Cañizares at 11 under share the Malaysian Open lead. And here in the nation, prosecutors have indicted the doctor who injected swimmer Park Tae-hwan with testosterone with professional negligence. Authorities said that while they believe the doctor, surnamed Kim, wasn't aware Nebido was a banned substance, it was his obligation to confirm the contents before administering shots. The latest development may sway world swimming body FINA to be more lenient with Park at the February 27th hearing, but the swimmer still faces a lengthy ban that would take him out of the 2016 Rio Olympics. And leaving that there, let's head to the first of the KBL doubleheader to the tip-off in Changwon. The LG Sakers faced the Dongbu Promi, going for their 12th straight victory. Dongbu, however, had other ideas, breaking through in the second quarter to cruise to the win and stop LG's streak at 11. Meanwhile, on the other side of the spectrum, the Samsung Thunder snapped an 11-game losing streak, beating the KCC Aegis at home. After a month of futility, they finally get their first win of 2015. And finally, the Korea Football Association has vowed to support under-23 manager Lee Kwang-jong, who was diagnosed with leukemia and stepped down from his post. Korea's football body said they would not only support Lee's medical costs and recovery, but welcome him back to the association when he's ready. Shin Tae-young has been pegged the interim coach. Now, it's a heartwarming gesture by the KFA after all the 50-year-old coach has done for the nation's football program, most recently leading South Korea to the Asian Games gold last year. And that wraps it up for sports this week. Your weather's up next. Have a good night.
Good evening, I'm Michelle Park here with the latest weather forecast. Current mild conditions will continue, and on Saturday we can expect temperatures to climb, even reaching into the teens for some regions. However, a sudden cool spell will hit us on Sunday morning, pulling down the mercury to negative 11 degrees, and daytime highs are also expected to stay at sub-zero levels. Now, this cold weather is forecast through Monday with snow in some regions, including on Jeju Island. Conditions will warm back up again by Tuesday, so until then, bundle up and stay warm. Now let's take a look at the readings for tomorrow. So we'll start off with Saturday morning at -2 and gets up high at 6 degrees, while Daegu and Busan will top out at 8 and 10. And to other regions, Jeju Island gets up to 10 as well. Dokdo hits 7, while Mankungang drops low to -4 degrees. Well, that's all for now, Michelle Park, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you very much, Michelle. And that does it for this edition of Primetime News.
And thanks for watching. We'll see you again next week.